There's a player in the NBA right now that teams are starting to hate to play against. Analysts are comparing him to Magic Johnson and saying that at just 24 years old, he already has Hall of Fame level talent. Some even believe he could take the Charlotte Hornets to their first NBA title. But just a year ago, that same player was dealing with injury after injury, and many were starting to believe he'd never live up to the hype. Yup, that player is LaMelo Ball, a 6'7" point guard who can do it all, and he is now turning into a nightmare for NBA defenses. So, how did LaMelo Ball go from being doubted to completely taking over? And why are so many teams starting to fear facing off against Charlotte? Well, to understand that, we have to go back to the 2020 NBA draft.
With the third pick in the 2020 NBA draft, the Charlotte Hornets select LaMelo Ball from Chino Hills, California.
LaMelo Ball, the youngest of the three Ball brothers, after taking an insane route to the NBA, starting by competing against players far older than him as a child.
He was 11 years old playing in 17U, wow. AAU. If you have you 6'5", and Melo bust your ass for 20-something points, the guy trying to give you a scholarship be like, you can't even guard an 11-year-old.
To then dominating at his local high school, Chino Hills.
LeVar, cherry picking, isn't he?
Hey, check that out. I love cherries. And if you're going to let me sit back there and cherry pick without putting somebody back there, you just don't know how to coach. So it's okay. If we cherry pick, you should score every time because it's 5-on-4.
Before being dragged to Lithuania, then back to the States to play in his dad's new league, the JBA, then to Spire Academy, and then finally dominating in the Australian National League, the NBL, which saw him chosen third. However, despite Melo showcasing his incredible all-around talent overseas, with some scouts even going so far as to compare him to Luka Doncic, doubts that he could actually translate his streetball-esque game to the league existed, and many wondered, could LaMelo Ball truly succeed in the NBA just as his father had predicted?
Melo's going to be the best on the fact that he's the youngest. Right. More experience learning from his other brother.
December 23rd, 2020. Suiting up for the first time on the highest stage of basketball, LaMelo got to work at trying to prove everyone wrong. And as the final buzzer rang, Ball had already become a part of NBA history.
Of the top three picks, I think they said in the last 20-25 years, he, Otto Porter Jr., Greg Oden, and Hassim Thabit are the only top three picks that did not score a point in the NBA debut.
16 minutes last night, and while he was on the floor, he looked lost to me. There were a lot of standing in the corner plays where he's like watching Terry Rozier, and they were playing him with Rozier and Devontae Graham. They were playing three guards. Well, how much touch is he going to get? Right. How much are you going to have the basketball in his hands? Not a lot.
No.
So,
and I don't know if he's a guy that can play without the ball in his hands.
He is the point guard.
He's
got to be the orchestrator of the offense.
Yet, despite failing to record a single point through his debut, Melo responded in their following game against the Oklahoma City Thunder by finally putting the ball through the net for the first time in the NBA. But he hadn't just scored 1 point. No, LaMelo added in 13 on 50% shooting in less time than he played during his debut. However, it's what happened just 2 games later that truly began to shock the NBA world.
Final minute. LaMelo rings the bell from distance.
Facing off for the first time against the Dallas Mavericks, Ball, who was coming off the bench behind Hornets guards Terry Rozier and Devontae Graham, was desperate to prove that, in fact, he should be Charlotte's starting point guard.
He is Showtime. He possibly has the potential to be the face of the NBA in a couple of years. He is a baby Magic Johnson in the making.
LaMelo, are you kidding? What a night for the rookie!
Thanks to an insane 22-point night on a shocking effective field goal percentage of 90%, whilst also grabbing 8 vital rebounds and still throwing 5 assists, LaMelo Ball had given the rest of the league a small peek at his full potential. But immediately after this epic night, Ball returned to his initial struggles. Because over the Hornets' following 4 matchups, Melo seemingly lost his ability to find the bottom of the net, shooting a poor 37% from the field, and while he was averaging 13.3 points, plus still throwing 6.3 assists each game, doubt that LaMelo could actually be efficient enough to truly carry an NBA franchise was rising. So, set to face off against his eldest brother, Lonzo, and his New Orleans Pelicans, Melo was desperate to prove to the Hornets that he could in fact take this franchise from the depths of the league, not only to the postseason, but potentially to their first NBA championship.
They're still a ways away as Ball again shows off incredible skill level.
And Pelicans are the #1 rebounding team in the league.
LaMelo over his brother Lonzo hits a 3.
However, yet again, Ball's poor shooting, only scoring 4 of his 11 attempts, made it blatant that perhaps the Hornets should have chosen another player with their 3rd pick. But there was actually something else on the stat sheet which gave Charlotte's franchise hope. Because throughout this Ball v Ball battle, LaMelo had not only grabbed 10 rebounds, but was quite literally 1 assist short of becoming the youngest player in NBA history to record a triple-double. And this is made even more insane when you realize he did so coming off the bench and playing just 25 minutes. Therefore, knowing just how close he was to etching his name in the history books, Melo came out in their following battle against the Atlanta Hawks, desperate to finally improve his efficiency and collect that extra assist.
LaMelo! That's a good one. 3. LaMelo challenges Capella and wins the battle. Points, 8 rebounds, 9 assists. Deep 3!
LaMelo Ball, after skyrocketing his percentages to the 70s, and after doing this,
there it is. If that's ruled an assist, that's number 10 for LaMelo Ball, and he's got a triple-double.
Had incredibly just destroyed the player who he was being compared to's record, and became the youngest athlete in the history of the league to record a triple-double at just 19. Yet, despite smashing his older brother's former record, Ball still was no longer a starter in the NBA, and hungry to earn a spot as one of the 30 leading point guards in the league, LaMelo set out to prove to his head coach James Borrego and the franchise that they should be building around him. Something that the Charlotte Hornets had no choice but to consider after the shocking events of their final game in January against the Milwaukee Bucks. January 30th, 2021.
5 reserves in the... Oh my goodness! And ahead by double figures is amazing. Oh yeah! Miles Bridges! What a dime by LaMelo! Didn't spend 1 day in college, but you could tell he would have been an English major.
While LaMelo had put on an incredible showing off the bench once again, dropping 27 points on 80% shooting against the squad favored to win the NBA title this season, whilst also throwing 9 beautiful dimes, it's what happened towards the end of the game with Terry Rozier that changed everything. As with Rozier forced to sit out for at least the next few games, Ball was finally presented with the opportunity he had been dreaming of his whole life, a starting point guard role in the NBA. However, just like his debut in the league, Melo's first game possessing the keys to the Hornets offense was a bumpy ride. 3 from 11 shooting, which only produced 13 points, combined with the fact that Charlotte had just narrowly lost this overtime battle against the Miami Heat, saw many once again question, was LaMelo really efficient enough to become that guy for an NBA franchise? February 5th, 2021. With the return of a now healthy Terry Rozier, Charlotte was presented with a difficult decision. Return their rookie to the bench, keep Rozier as their 6th man, or move their rising star, Devontae Graham, to the pine.
LaMelo. Keep on keeping on, young fella.
Well, with the move to push Graham into a 6th man role and Rozier to their starting shooting guard spot, the Hornets' feelings about their future was made clear.
Oh, LaMelo!
Something that the Chino Hills native proved throughout this battle against the Utah Jazz the right decision. Because just 23 games into his rookie season, LaMelo had shockingly recorded his first ever 30 or more point game, pouring in 34 points on 52% shooting throughout this loss to the Jazz. However, despite failing in the win column, now gifted with the trust from his head coach and franchise, Melo was beginning to not only feel comfortable, but actually starting to iron out many of the kinks he had faced early in his career. As over their next 18 games, Ball's 20-point average on 47% from the field and 42% from 3, plus his insane rookie record tying 7 made 3 performance against the Houston Rockets had shown that, despite an untraditional shot, that Melo could actually be an efficient bucket getter at the NBA level. Combine this with his 5.8 rebound and 6.6 assist averages, some were already making shocking claims.
LaMelo Ball is right now playing at kind of an all-star level.
But everything would take a horrific turn during a mid-March battle against the Los Angeles Clippers. Because after landing awkwardly on his wrist, Ball was ruled out indefinitely, and while he was fortunate enough to return healthy for the final 10 games of the Hornets' 2020-2021 campaign, he just wasn't the same player. LaMelo's numbers dipped back down to his early season showings, shooting just 38% from the field and 24% from 3, plus only producing an average of 15.1 points. However, despite his shooting struggles, likely attributed to the simple fact his shooting hand was still recovering, Ball hadn't lost his feel for the game. As the fact that Melo was still throwing 6.2 assists and grabbing 6.2 rebounds, plus the insane performances he had shown all season long, saw the rookie achieve the incredible.
Oh! I'm in it!
Congrats, brother. Rookie of the year, bro. Congrats, bro.
Combine Melo being crowned as the league's Rookie of the Year with the fact that Devontae Graham had been traded away over the offseason, one thing was made blatantly clear. The Charlotte Hornets were ready to hand LaMelo Ball the keys to their future. However, was Ball actually ready? Could an unorthodox player really carry an NBA franchise further than they had ever gone? And are you subscribed? October 20th, 2021.
I'd go with the second one because of the heat check. That was a heat check for LaMelo Ball.
Now in his sophomore season in the NBA and the clear face of the Hornets franchise, Melo set out to showcase to the rest of the league just how dominant he was going to be, now holding the keys to the offense.
Fourth in the quarter. TJ McConnell is in, they lob it up, and Plumlee makes it a one-possession game.
Thanks to Ball's 31 points on 7 made threes, 9 boards, and 7 assists, Charlotte began their 2021-2022 campaign victorious, one of hopefully many as they look to finally return to the playoffs for the first time since 2016. However, after starting their season insanely hot, rocketing out to a 5-2 record, Charlotte entered this November 8th matchup with the Los Angeles Lakers on a 4-game losing streak and desperate to return their record to 500. Therefore, LaMelo Ball went out and did what he does best.
Here comes Ball with the speed dribble. And Ball up and over. Bradley gets a foul and counted. Ball, you're far too kind. Here's Hayward now, set up by Ball, and it's good. Ball on a run. Ball, left-handed layup is good.
But even with the Chino Hills native playing in front of friends and family in Los Angeles and pulling down 16 rebounds, throwing 12 assists, and pouring in 25 points, it was tragically the Lakers extending the Hornets' losing streak to 5. Yet, desperate to get back to the winning ways he was so used to during his time at Chino Hills, Melo's 9.1 rebound, 8.8 assist, and 18.1 point averages, helped by a 32-point night against the Indiana Pacers, had incredibly seen Charlotte win 8 of their next 9, now holding a huge 13-8 record. A massively improved start to this season that saw the Hornets on pace to win at least 50 games and certainly return to the playoffs for the first time in nearly a decade. However, with their rising star forced to miss multiple games directly after their hot start due to health and safety protocols, Charlotte fell as quickly as they had risen. Because over the franchise's following 11 games, without Melo for most of them, the Hornets had only managed to record just 2 victories, seeing their record dip below 500 yet again. Therefore, as the new year fast approached, Ball set some very clear goals.
New year, new me. Same me though.
Firstly, get his team into the postseason, and secondly, be named as an NBA All-Star. Yet, could he really do it? February 19th, 2022, LaMelo Ball, after an insane 23-game run before the All-Star break had arrived, in which the Hornets guard had recorded 3 30 or more point games, 6 10 or more assist nights, and averaged 20.5 points as a sophomore, was amazingly crowned with an All-Star nod. But despite achieving his secondary vision, Ball's main focus still remained on one thing and one thing only: winning. Something that, even with Ball performing at an all-star level, that his Hornets had struggled to do. Because as the ball was tipped for their first battle back from the break, Charlotte's record still stood 2 games below 500, and with a stacked Eastern Conference ahead of them, it seemed as if the Hornets would have to win each and every one of their final 22 games in order to enter the postseason. However, due to LaMelo's poor return from representing the franchise, which chose him 3rd overall, in which Ball shot just 38% from the field and 34% from 3, meant that Charlotte, with just 15 games left, was now 3 games below 500. Therefore, LaMelo Ball knew exactly what he had to do.
Ball has to throw it up, and
7 rebounds, pull up 3 in transition. It's good. 30 points for Ball.
Yet, despite the Hornets star impressively turning things around, now averaging 21.8 points on 47% from the field and 47% from 3, plus throwing 8.9 dimes per night, Charlotte, even with an amazing 11-4 run to round out the 2021-2022 season, had just come short of their postseason dreams due to a heartbreaking loss in the play-in game versus the Atlanta Hawks, which saw many begin to wonder, was LaMelo Ball heading into his 3rd season either going to take a massive leap and finally carry his Hornets into the playoffs, or was this the best version of Ball fans were ever going to see? October 10th, 2022. Facing off against the Washington Wizards as the Hornets were preparing for a playoff run in the 2022-2023 season, tragedy struck LaMelo Ball, as after suffering an ankle sprain, Ball was ruled out for the start of the Hornets' fresh campaign, and even though he returned 14 games into the season, just 3 nights later, things only got worse.
Great anticipation by LaMelo, but he can't keep it in bounds. Oh, and LaMelo.
However, thankfully, much like his initial preseason injury, this one wasn't serious. No damage to any ligaments had occurred, and Melo was back on an NBA court 12 games later, and Ball, unlike his ankle, was on a tear, averaging a shocking 24.8 points, 5.7 rebounds, and 8.7 assists. Yet, even with the return of their star player, the Charlotte Hornets only continued down the path of losing. Because after 18 games with Ball back in the lineup, Charlotte had only managed to win 4. And on January 18, 2023, tragedy struck yet again.
Jabari Smith. Both LaMelo Ball and PJ Washington hit the deck. And they do. LaMelo limps to the bench.
To make things even worse, while LaMelo would once again return just 3 days later and return to his insane averages, as he looked to continue to push his Hornets towards more W's, something devastating happened.
Something happened with LaMelo. He was...
Let's see. Low ball handler.
Yeah, that's his own feet. Didn't step on anyone.
A non-contact ankle fracture that had completely ended the All-Stars 2022-2023 campaign, which raised a vital question. Even if the Charlotte Hornets could build a championship winning squad around their star, could LaMelo even be healthy enough to lead them? November 26th, 2023, LaMelo Ball, after an insane start to his 2023-2024 campaign, in which the star recorded an 8-game stretch of 30 points versus Dallas, 34 against Washington, 32 versus the Knicks, 37 on the Bucks, 34 against New York, 36 points versus Boston, and 34 on the Wizards' heads, seeing him average 32.2 points on 50% from the field and 44% from 3, plus still throwing 8.7 assists per night, had proved to the NBA that, at least talent-wise, Ball was ready. However, health-wise, he just might not be.
So recruit that for him.
Ankle. difficult to tell. He's putting no weight on that right leg.
Because once again, after returning from a lengthy recovery from yet another ankle injury, Ball would only appear in 7 further games before being ruled out for the remainder of the 2023-2024 season. A devastating fact that saw many begin to wonder, would LaMelo's career follow that of his older brothers? Because Alonzo, who had shown flashes of insane talent during the 2021-2022 season with the Chicago Bulls, simply hadn't appeared in an NBA game for 2 straight seasons due to knee issues. So were these doubts true? Would LaMelo never play a fully healthy season ever again? October 23rd, 2024.
Both sides scoreless, 90 seconds into our game. LaMelo Ball!
Finally getting a chance to compete alongside the Hornets' second pick from the 2023 draft, Brandon Miller, Ball was excited after a lengthy period of rest and development to prove to the world that not only was he talented enough,
Hornets can take the lead. Who wants to? Miles does! 9.5. What's new? Oh my goodness! The kid's a baller!
but also healthy enough to succeed, because thanks to shockingly scoring 34 points in his debut game for the 2024-25 season, whilst also throwing 11 assists, Melo had shown the NBA exactly what to expect in this fresh season. Yet, Ball was now facing a brand new issue, one that scouts all the way back in the 2020 pre-draft process feared would hinder Melo's career, as while the now fourth-year NBA player had essentially mirrored his stat line from their first battle against the Atlanta Hawks,
LaMelo, my goodness, monster three,
doing so on 9 made threes. Ball's shocking 10 turnovers resulted in his Hornets racking up their first loss of this young season, a tragic theme which only continued, because a few games later, facing off against the defending NBA champion Boston Celtics in a back-to-back battle, despite Ball recording a shocking 31 and then 36 points against one of the league's best defensive teams, even doing so efficiently on 53% from the field and 43% from 3, had recorded a tragic 10 total turnovers across both games. So if LaMelo was to finally achieve his one true dream of getting back to the playoffs and competing for an NBA championship, Melo had no choice but to figure out his turnover issue, as if he doesn't, Charlotte will only continue to be the laughingstock of the NBA. November 8th, 2024. Fresh off a 25-point, 6-assist, and 2 turnover victory against the Pistons, LaMelo Ball was looking to do the exact same thing tonight against the Indiana Pacers.
It just blows right past. Wonderful basketball by number 1!
And guess what? Having recorded only a single turnover whilst producing 31 points, Ball had done just that. However, after returning to a shocking 6 turnover performance in their following battle against the Philadelphia 76ers that resulted in an overtime loss, it became blatant that his Hornets franchise, so long as Melo was struggling to maintain possession of the ball, was never going to achieve their playoff hopes. Because even with LaMelo dropping a brand new career high of 50 points against the Milwaukee Bucks, which he followed up by adding in 44 against the Orlando Magic, plus averaging 33.1 points and 7.9 assists since that Philly loss, with the Hornets star averaging 4.3 turnovers, their record sat far below 500 at 6-12. To make matters even worse, with Ball straining his calf late in their loss against the Miami Heat, he once again returned to that all-familiar place of the Charlotte Hornets injury list. Yet, while Ball would eventually return, his downward trend in shooting percentages, shooting just 39% from the field and 29% from 3 for a 25.4 point average, saw his Hornets also heading downhill, recording 9 losses in a row. A devastating theme that simply continued throughout the 2024-2025 season, as with the former All-Star constantly in and out of the lineup with ankle problems, which resulted in poor performances from the Hornets star, combined with Charlotte's horrific win-loss record, saw Ball flat out ruled out for the remainder of this season in late March. So was LaMelo Ball's second season truly his peak? Would he ever actually be healthy enough to achieve his postseason dreams? Or would Charlotte begin to move away from LaMelo Ball? December 18th, 2025, Ball yet again has missed 10 of Charlotte's first 27 games with ankle issues. Therefore, the Hornets' record stands at a tragic 9-18. A devastating fact that even with the Hornets clearly making an excellent decision on draft night with their selection of Conkanipple, made it clear that this might just be another season of Hornets losing game after game after game. Or would it?
Early in our game, LaMelo, welcome back! Lusa missed the game a week ago. Has only missed one contest all season. LaMelo! Living LaMelo! Loco! LaMelo! Good to have him back!
Thanks to the return of their former All-Star in this battle against the Atlanta Hawks, and Melo adding in a crucial 25 points and 13 assists, Ball had placed his squad within reach of recording their 10th win of the season. All LaMelo had to do now was secure their W with either a bucket or a clutch dime.
The kill shot!
Yet, even with the return of LaMelo and Ball's super efficient 8-game stretch in which he had shot 46% from 3 whilst throwing a crucial 6.9 assists a night, the Charlotte Hornets had once again struggled, recording just 3 wins whilst losing 5, placing their overall record at 12-23. So, was this the end of the LaMelo Ball era? Because it seemed like surrounding Ball with elite talent just wasn't enough. Or was this the beginning of one of the most epic turnarounds in NBA history? January 5th, 2026, facing off against the defending NBA champions, the Oklahoma City Thunder, Charlotte set out to recorrect the course of their struggling ship back in the direction of winning. Something that, thanks to an insane all-around performance from their roster, 28 points from Brandon Miller, 23 from Conipple, and 17 from Miles Bridges, that allowed something shocking to happen. As now permitted to do what he does best, play make and score when needed, Ball's 16 had helped his Hornets get a huge W.
It's great. When everybody playing like that, it's just like a free flow state, and it just make all of our jobs easier.
Then, shortly after defeating OKC in their battle against the Los Angeles Lakers, Melo would show the other side of his game.
It's a blow by. Wow! Get in there! Look at LaMelo! Great balls of fire!
As in this matchup, rather than doing his damage through making plays for others, Ball completely took over by adding in 30 points. Yet, despite scoring from anywhere and everywhere, LaMelo still threw an incredible 11 assists on just 2 turnovers. But that's not all, because over Charlotte's following 13 games, Ball was quite literally unstoppable.
LaMelo Ball, Nick, now he is not en route, but he has Hall of Fame ability.
As not only had the Hornets managed to record a franchise record 9-game winning streak, but as they headed into their early February battle against the Detroit Pistons, Charlotte was just 2 wins away from their record, incredibly standing at 500. However, after a massive brawl broke out, which saw players ejected and suspended from both sides, Charlotte had tragically seen their streak snapped at the hands of the Pistons. Yet, unlike every other year LaMelo Ball had been in the NBA, his Hornets didn't pout or get off track. No, they bounced right back.
LaMelo! Oh my word! It's going up! Yes! The best third quarter ever!
Because thanks to Ball's insane nights, such as 37 points, 8 rebounds, and 7 assists against the Washington Wizards, or his 22-point, 4.9 rebound, 6.8 assist on 42% from the field and 39% from 3 shooting averages, plus finishing second in total made threes across the season, second only to teammate Conkanipple, the Charlotte Hornets had made a shocking improvement, going from an embarrassing 19 wins last season to 44. But sitting in the 9th seed in the Eastern Conference, if the Charlotte Hornets were to actually make the playoffs for the first time since 2016, they were going to have to make it past the 10th seeded Miami Heat in the play-in game and then battle the loser of the 7th-8th matchup just to earn the right to face off against the number 1 seeded Pistons in round 1. So could they get it done? April 14th, 2026.
The push-up goes. LaMelo Ball breaks the seal.
Driven to finally push his franchise into the playoffs for the first time in a decade, Ball was doing everything. Only his three-point shot, which had been so reliable all season long at 37%, seemingly disappeared. Yet, still managing to add a crucial 26 points, the Charlotte Hornets were presented with one final opportunity to push this game into overtime.
White, turn around.
Thanks to the insanely clutch bucket from the player they acquired at the trade deadline, Kobe White, Charlotte earned an additional 5 minutes to move on to face the Orlando Magic for an opportunity to break their 10-season-long playoff drought. Yet, once again, the Hornets found themselves down with limited time remaining, and many, thanks to the Heat's insane ability to stay alive in this playing game, assumed that Miami had this game in the bag. Or did they?
The drive and fire lays it up. There's no timeouts left for Miami. Charlotte up by one. The drive, it's over.
So now just one victory away from facing off against the #1 seeded Detroit Pistons in round 1. Could LaMelo Ball and his Hornets finally get it done? April 17th, 2026. The Orlando Magic, a squad who had struggled to remain healthy all season long, and a team which allegedly held internal issues after losing to the 7th-seeded Philadelphia 76ers, were seemingly done. But their head coach, Jamal Mosley, had a trick up his sleeve to motivate his underperforming roster.
Gonzaga has time to do something. Suggs for the win. Oh, yes! Unbelievable!
Showcasing collegiate highlights of his players rather than a scouting report of the Charlotte Hornets to remind each and every member of his roster just how talented they were and how capable of performing under pressure they should be. Which, while Ball was able to refine his regular season form that he had seemingly lost throughout regulation against the Heat, the remainder of the Hornets roster was struggling. Because thanks to Charlotte shooting just 34% from the field and 27% from 3, it was unfortunately the Orlando Magic entering the playoffs and the Charlotte Hornets heading home empty-handed.
It hurt, so obviously just use all that fuel for the off-season, all your workouts, extra rep, whatever you're looking at, and just remember, should be better for next year.
Speaking of LaMelo Ball, if you want to learn more about how he truly became as dominant as he is today, the insane predictions his father, LeVar, made about not only his youngest, but also his other sons, LiAngelo and Lonzo, plus how the whole Ball family proved everyone wrong, click the video on your screen right now.